Hi everybody, and welcome to the How to Shoot Hybrid podcast from Your Story Studios. My name's Lindsay and I'm joined by Jules today. Here on this podcast, we discuss photography, videography, filmmaking and topics around building successful and sustainable creative businesses. We share things that we've experienced or learned along the way, and we speak with guests who share their own experiences too. Importantly, here we want to build an open-minded community so that we can learn and grow, and we hope that you enjoy doing that with us.
Right, so today we're going to be discussing which is harder, photo or video.
Photo, no video. No photo, no video.
Spoiler alert, we're probably not going to say which one it is.
Oh.
We're going to sit on the fence.
Just going to sit on the fence.
No, we're going to have a discussion around it. There are things that are more difficult, I would say, about doing photo, and there's things that are more difficult about doing video, and that's what we're going to be discussing. The idea is not to kind of polarize and create controversy and be opinionated about it. It's more a case of there are difficulties and things that are a bit easier about the different mediums, should we say, and the idea being that we're going to discuss those because if you are a photographer wanting to get into video or a videographer wanting to get into photo, these are the sorts of things that really you need to consider.
Yeah.
If you're going to learn the other discipline.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, we're going to base the conversation around weddings and working with like small businesses and organisations from like a commercial perspective. So we're not talking about like higher end photo studio stuff where you're working with like really high end clients and doing really big commercial jobs or actual film, like making proper films, which would require larger teams, lots of people involved. Same with it, whether it's a commercial photo shoot or whether it was you were making some kind of like film, you'd have lots of people involved. We're aiming this more at your kind of small team / single shooter on their own.
Yeah.
That's what we're discussing, because obviously if you've got large teams of people have like individual roles, and so you're not having to be a jack of all trades in that situation. We're talking about what we might do on a weekly basis, shooting weddings or what have you.
Yeah.
That's the idea around the discussion. For us personally, I think we feel that they're quite equal in terms of the upsides of each, but rather than it be about our preference, we wanted to give like a bit more of an objective insight into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's information, isn't it? So it's the idea is not to kind of ram down your throat what we think is best. It's about information sharing. And I guess, yes, kind of we give a personal slant on it because we can talk about our experience of doing them both and what we've kind of found might be more difficult about one or the other. And like you said, it's just to kind of get your mind ticking over, because if you are in that position, as Jules said, where you're thinking about moving into hybrid or thinking about just trying to offer the other service, then it's handy just to have an idea of what might be a bit more challenging.
So we're going to go through kind of the reasons, aren't we?
Yeah.
So let's start it with the preparation. If we break it down, I thought we'd break it down to preparation, shooting, and then post-production and delivery, and then we'll talk about it more general.
Yeah.
But I thought, you see, whenever it comes to things, I think that those three stages are really important because they're very different and they bring different things, particularly when it comes to photo and video. You've got different considerations.
Yeah.
So first of all, the gear. Everybody loves talking about gear, don't they? Well, you don't necessarily. You don't care. A lot of people in the photo and video industries love talking about gear.
Gear is great. You can't do what we all do
without the gear. No. So let's start with photo. The thing with photo is the gear is probably slightly less I'm not going to say important because you still need a camera and a lens, but I think that you need less gear with photo.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that.
and it's quite an obvious one, I suppose. And if you are a photographer and you've worked alongside videographers, you might be thinking, oh, they've got quite, they have to bring quite a lot of gear, don't they? And that might be something that puts you off. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that would put you, if we didn't already do both, do you think if you were just doing photo and that's what you'd got used to, do you think the gear aspect would put you off?
I think first of all it would depend on how much gear I use myself as a photographer. It would depend on how much I would rely on incorporating into my day or being equipped for any like off-camera flash work, how much through the day I'm going to use flash, how many cards and batteries I might go through, how many props I like to incorporate into it.
Yeah, I never thought of props. I don't know. Have we worked with many photographers that bring props? I remember one person bringing a sheet of wallpaper that they were using using as like flat lay stuff.
Right. But things like we see the prisms, we see people. Yeah. I mean, everybody's going to have the phone with them anyway, just to kind of try and use the phone screen to create a reflection. But there are other photography teams who will use so like for instance Nick and Nick that we worked with a few weeks ago at Photogenic, they have kind of portable
they're bringing like a softbox and a strobe out there to do certain parts of. So I hadn't thought of it like that. You don't work with many photographers that use off-camera flash in that way. I've not worked with loads of them, but I'm aware of them.
Yeah.
So I suppose there is that, and that would be, that's more equipment than an average photographer, I would say.
Another one, sorry, I forgot. There's like what comes on the lighting, but the wands. Some people use the
they used to call them ice lights or something, then Godox start. Yeah. They're quite handy, but I would say that they're actually. I mean, they are used by photographers, but I think that it comes kind of under the video light thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you would use those potentially as a videographer as well. Yeah. So I mean, the thing for me is the cameras that you can use to get good photos. I say don't need to be. I'd say the cameras that videographers use are probably going to be a bit more expensive generally. Not like we've got Sony A1. That's essentially a really good photography camera that also does really good video. It's expensive, and both people could use that. Photographers could use that, videographers could use that. Do you need a Sony A1 to do your photography? Not really. Do you know what I mean? The investment there was because it's a good hybrid camera and because it does offer, you can shoot up to 8K, not that we do that. You've got all the 4K options, and from a photography perspective, it really is a very good camera for photography. So that's the kind of, because we were focusing on the hybrid side of things, that's the reason for the investment. But you don't need that, and you could still get amazing photos with a much cheaper camera. So I just think that, photo, if you're going to just do photography, you don't need to spend probably as much in equipment just on the camera. Yeah?
Yeah.
You need less batteries. You don't need to spend as much probably on memory cards because you don't need the speed and capacity of the memory cards. So there's a lower cost to entry, I would say, with photography. Let's look at video. You need more cameras generally. Like, obviously, you'd never recommend anybody goes and shoots something like a wedding with one photography camera, just in case it breaks and you've not got anything else to shoot with. But you technically could shoot with one camera. Whereas with video, I would never, ever recommend anyone goes and shoots a live event with one camera.
No.
You're going to want more than one camera for your multicam stuff so that you can make sure you've always got an angle to cut to. And you might need different lenses. Like, whereas a lot of people use primes, I do think, and again, this is just all how you shoot, but to give you more options, I do think as a videographer, it's more important to have. It's not necessary. You could shoot video with two primes. you know, like a 24 or a 35 and an 85 or something like that. But I do think that having a zoom lens as a videographer is really handy for like a back angle, or if you are not able to get close enough. I know there's lots of people that will just shoot with primes, but I do think that there'll be situations where if you haven't got that zoom lens, you'll be wishing you did. You know, it might not happen very often. As long as you can control where you're going to stand and everything and the environment, you're all right. But there's more chance as a videographer that you're going to have to position yourself further away or in a situation where it's not optimal. And if you've got that zoom lens, it just gives you a bit more of a versatility.
Yeah.
And potentially, you know, be able to get closer without getting closer.
Yeah.
So that's like the basics of it. But then as well, for video, you do need extra pieces of equipment. Like a photographer doesn't really need a tripod or any kind of stabilization equipment. They just literally need, you know, their camera, and however they choose to carry that is kind of their choice. But they don't need a video. You could shoot video without a tripod, for instance, but I wouldn't want to stand there hand holding through an entire wedding ceremony.
No.
Or if I was conducting an interview for a commercial job, I wouldn't want to be hand holding. It wouldn't be very professional. You probably wouldn't get very good results. So, you know, you need extra bits of equipment, and we're just, you know, tripod's a tripod, but then you might need, or you might want something like a Steadicam or a gimbal. I think there's more. I don't think a photographer having a drone is as much of a thing as people kind of now expect almost a videographer to have a drone. That doesn't mean that every videographer needs to have a drone. I just think that it's now become like a thing where people have seen aerial footage in a lot of video stuff. Yeah. So I just think that it's not an essential piece of equipment, but it's certainly something that more and more people would expect a videographer to have. Whereas with a photographer, unless you are an aerial photographer, like at a wedding, you can get away with not having a drone as a wedding photographer. So I just think that, you know, whilst you can have 1-2 cameras, couple of lenses, couple of batteries, and some, you know, memory cards in your cameras, and that's pretty much all you really need as a photographer. Yes, flash. I would always suggest you have a flash, but you don't need an elaborate lighting setup. If you start incorporating lighting into video, again, there's just a bit more to it. Yeah. In terms of the equipment and how much you've got to spend on it. You know, a Godox flash, £100 to £200. You've got a flash that you can use on camera. You know, £100 to £200 for lighting equipment for video is probably not a big enough investment. There are lights that you can get for that, but it's probably not enough if you're wanting to kind of really light your dance floor or whatever it is. Okay. So photo in that respect is easier because it's cheaper. You've got less equipment, and I think that it isn't just about the price of the equipment. It's the fact that you're not carrying as much. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So we're not just talking about the cost of outlay, which is more for video, but it's as well like having to carry all that equipment around. Don't you think sometimes where if you're doing video and the photographer's just kind of able to move so quickly, but you know that you can't work like that. You've got to bring a little bit, even if you're minimalistic, and I think we're fairly minimalistic, but you've got to bring more, and therefore you've got to think about how you're going to store it and making sure it's accessible when you need it. Yeah. You know, like things like bringing the tripods. It's not a big deal. I'm not making it like, you know. No. But it's, you know, it's not just like I've got my camera on my strap and I'm carrying it around. You've got to kind of think about these things. Yeah. I was just thinking back then to the photographer at the weekend that we worked with, and his backpack was a nice little compact one. It was tiny, wasn't it? Yeah, not one that I'd seen before. And there was 2 camera bodies, 2 lenses in there, and he'll have had batteries and some cards. I think it did later on go back to the card. He had a light stand and a small light that he was going to use on the dance floor, but
didn't need that in the end because
we had ours. Yeah.
Up. So essentially, that whole day he just used what was in the little backpack.
Yeah,
and it was nice, little compact, that nice and easy to get around. Whereas, sort of for us when we're doing video, a consideration, like you've said, because of all the different sort of bits of equipment, because there's audio equipment in there as well that we haven't mentioned. We're always kind of looking, and I'm sure many of you are as well, looking for a safe spot that you can put your kit bags down in, because you're not necessarily going to need that with you all of the time, but when you are considering the video aspect of things, you need a safe spot. You're going to need somewhere that you want to keep the other camera bodies or your other lenses whilst you're actively using another set, for instance.
Yeah, whereas as just shooting photo, you can probably just carry that round all day because it's not as heavy.
Yeah.
You're not going to be like making your back hurt because you're carrying this huge bag around.
That's it, yeah.
So yeah, definitely. And it's not as straightforward as that. We're not saying for a second that it's just clean cutters, because there'll be people that shoot video that can just have one small bag and, you know, two bodies, and maybe they have like one tripod or a monopod, and they can kind of shoot like that, and it's possible. But I do think just generally you need more stuff.
Yeah.
What about the kind of planning aspect of it? That's something that I thought was quite important. So if you think about it, and we've worked alongside plenty of photographers who don't actually seem to know what the timeline of the day is, and that's not being a criticism. It's just that I know from doing video that we couldn't work like that, because if we didn't know when and where things were going to happen, and we didn't know who was speaking and things like that, we'd come a cropper, because we wouldn't be capturing, for instance, the audio. So let's say whoever's speaking in the ceremony, whoever's speaking during speeches and toasts, if we don't know who's speaking, we can't put a microphone or an audio recorder on them, or, you know, able to capture that audio. So
or be ready to, know where they're sitting in the room or where they'll be positioned in the room, to know where to have cameras already set up, ready for, because, ideally you're
going to explain what you mean by that then.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's take like speeches or toast, for instance. More often than not, you will have a top table or a table that's central to the rest of the guests, whereby the couple will be sat, and you'll probably have parents, maybe any sort of best men, best women that might be there that will be doing a speech. In an ideal world, those that are speaking, they're all sat on the top table. So you only really need to think about, are you going to need to, where you're going to have your cameras pointing, ready for that. You'll have a close-up for who's going to be the speaker, and then probably a wide shot on the rest of the top table as well. So it's not going to take you too long, really, to kind of reposition from where they are. And normally, particularly if you have it in your questionnaire, you'll know what the running order is. You'll know in what order those people are going to speak. If you've got that, before the speeches do start, you want to be having a look at name cards and positioning and just finding out where those people are going to be located. So again, you're armed with that information so that as soon as you set the camera rolling, it's pointing on the right person. Because I guess if we jump ahead to the post and looking at the editing, there's nothing worse than audio will start on either the recordings, depending which audio you're going to use. Audio will start, but the camera's moving around and the camera's trying to find where the speaker is. Yeah. So that for us, that's not being organised. That's not having planned in advance of getting that all set up in time. Getting your ducks in a row, knowing who's going to be speaking and where they're going to be positioned. I guess it makes it much easier if in speeches or toasts you're going to have maybe a lectern or something that, or a stand or a central point that the speaker is going to come to. That obviously would be the same in during a ceremony, whether you're in a church or whether it's a civil type of ceremony. You will have a fixed point of where a speaker is going to go to.
Yeah, and I think in other parts of the world, in the UK, it's very common for people to just speak from the top table, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas I think in other parts of the world, it's more common for there to be a point where people are going to speak, and so then you can make that into a bit of a feature. Yeah. So that's probably a little bit of a difference as well, depending where you're listening.
Yeah. And then just for a photographer in that scenario, the audio and the moving visual is not an issue in that respect. So
well, they can just go wherever they want, can't they?
It can just position wherever you want to in the room. Just find a nice spot where you know you're going to be able to actually, you know, let's say we've got the same kind of setup. Again, we take the speeches or the toasts. We've got a central point of a table, a top table perhaps, and somebody stands up to start speaking on the top table.
And they don't have to be ready either.
Don't need to be ready for that.
Like if they start and they weren't quite ready to start shooting, they're not going to really miss anything.
No.
Whereas for video, you're going to have a problem then. You're going to have to do something to kind of cover up the fact that you weren't recording.
Yeah.
So it's just, you do have to be more organised when doing video. So you don't really, as just doing photo, you don't really need as much information prior to the event.
Yeah, perhaps just a very, you know, you'll manage with just a very
time
loose
and location.
idea.
What time's the ceremony?
The time, like ceremony, yeah. Drinks reception, okay. We'll factor in group shots, couples portraits before that. Probably touch base with the venue. Just confirm with them, or at what time will you plan to bring them in? What time do you want to show the couple around the room?
But you've just brought up actually a good point, that a photographer does need to be aware of what formal photos the couple are wanting, for example, when it comes to a wedding. So they need to, you know, know what that list is. And everyone does this differently, but ideally you want to know what that list is in advance.
Yes.
So that you can make sure you capture those photos and you do it in as an organised way as possible. Whereas if you're doing video at a wedding, you don't have to worry about that, do you?
No.
So... yeah, so I suppose,
and I guess then
swings and roundabouts.
So then just onto that, for that particular segment of the day then, so for the to help the photographer to make the kind of logistics of that a little bit easier, I think they would naturally, well, there's two of us, so what one of us, or what I would normally do, I guess, as you're getting ready for that and setting up for that, would be to find some members of either the bridal party or some groomsmen and with the list, ask somebody there to just help us sort of organise the groups. But for a photographer, particularly a single shooter, you know, that's, I guess that that can be quite a stressful part of the day, actually, that, because it's kind of coordinating all of those people whilst trying to and I don't know why it is, but just, you know, if you're a guest at a wedding, understand that you're going to have your picture taken at some point, particularly if you're a family member or a close friend or relative.
It's like the detest of people that I hate having my photo taken, and you're a bad person asking me to have my photo taken. It's like, well, you're the parents of one of the people getting married. Like, just be cool about having a photo taken. It's not my... I didn't ask you to have this photo taken. It's your son or daughter that wants the photo, not me.
Yeah. So
I'm just doing it for them.
I feel for photographers, and I recognise that can be a challenging part of the day, actually, that even if you're well prepared, you've got that list before the day, you still need to suss out on the day who those people are, or you need to at least suss out who you're going to get to help you, just to kind of round those people up and get that particular part of the day organised. Okay,
so seeing as we've jumped forward into the shooting section, segued nicely from the preparations, let's sort of talk about that then. So that bit for a photographer at a wedding, that is the harder part, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you can't just blend in at that part. There's a lot of expectation through the day of almost leading things a little bit. You become more of a coordinator type role. And that's it. If you've never done photography at a wedding before, like you might be a photographer and you've trained to be a photographer, or you've got a background in photography, but it could be product photography, or it could be landscape photography, or it could be like that you've worked in a studio with models and you're used to directing a model, but you're not used to having to sort out the logistics of a day. You know, people come to you, you're there to be like, right, I understand how the light works and I understand how I want the model to look, as in from a posing perspective, but I am having to deal with all these people all doing different stuff and all this timeline shit that's like quite
weather and conditions
changing all the time. Like you've basically you've got to think about 10 different things. So definitely from a wedding photography perspective or any kind of event photography, you've got a lot more to think about than if you were doing the video, I would say, in respect of logistics. So for a wedding videographer, a wedding filmmaker has to know and prepare in advance so that they are ready for X, Y, and Z happening. They know what time it's going to happen and they know who's doing it. So they have to be prepared in advance, and the photographer doesn't really need to. But on the day, the photographer needs to be able to handle lots of different things. Like, whereas the videographer can just, please themselves, really. They just focus on, I'm capturing
I'm capturing this in the background, but then when the more structured stuff happens, I need to know my stuff in advance so that I can be set up in advance.
And I will be set up.
Yeah.
Whereas the photographer is more like, it's a bit like, because we used to be in the police. In the police, sometimes you'd be dealing with so many different things at once, and you had to be able to multitask, and you had to be able to kind of like process information in like a non-linear way, because you just get bits of information all the time, and you'd have to do something about it, but it might not be in the sequence you wanted it to be in. Someone might come to you and say, this is happening, you have to deal with that, but you're in the middle of dealing with something else. That's what I was going to say. That's what a photographer's job is at a wedding's like.
Yeah.
Takes quite a skill set, that really.
It does to deal with spontaneous things occurring, changes in environment, weather, like we've said, changes that come indirectly from other people that are connected to the day, such as coordinators at the wedding itself, such as a preference of the bride and groom. Maybe there's been something that's happened with a member of the wedding party, and you've just done all those group shots and you thought you were going to get to take the couple now to go and have some of their own portraits done, and you had this nice little route that was planned out, but the groom fell over last night, unfortunately, had a bit too much to drink, and he's done his ankle in. So actually,
is this a real story?
No, I'm just making it up as I'm going along. But actually, the kind of spontaneity of you having to make an alternative decision whilst managing their expectations and reassuring them that, oh, don't worry, even though you've hurt your ankle and you can't now climb down all those steps that we wanted to go around or take that big scenic route that we wanted to take, that's okay. We'll do this and this instead. And
it could be that that's to do with the weather, or it could be to do with the way that the light is.
Or the groom hurting his ankle.
Or the groom hurting his ankle, which is sort of really odd story.
It's not a story. That was me thinking spontaneously about...
But this is the thing, you can't have like too fixed a mindset, whereas I think for a wedding videographer they can be a little bit more, this is my job, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to take my time over my job, rather than having to deal with all this stuff going on, because nobody's really coming to you unless they think you're the photographer because you look like a photographer, and they're like standing in front of you smiling waiting for you to take the photo, and you're like, it's video, mate. That happens at least once every wedding. So I think just at that, just taking into consideration that part of the day and the general logistical stuff, a photographer's job on a wedding day is much harder. But take that out, and having to, I think you need to be a bit more, you can't really be introverted doing that role. You've got to be able to kind of socialise. You've got to be able to talk a lot more. I think if you're doing video, you can be a little less intense and involved. You can be a bit more standing back, observing.
Yeah.
You've got more time to observe, whereas with a photographer, you kind of like, as well as wanting to observe and capture things, so you're looking, trying to like take it all in to be able to capture things and document things, you're also having to kind of spin a few more plates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for videographers as well, if your approach is that you know, you are quite, you like to keep a low profile on the day, that very much lends itself to that, doesn't it? You know, if your shooting style as well is a little bit more documentary, or as things happen, just get the atmosphere of the day. I think that role, if you like, just more easily lends itself to complementing your style.
Yeah.
If that's how you like to capture your footage, because you can sort of take that step back, as you say.
But, you know, to balance it out, when you're doing video at something like a wedding, again, we're using weddings as examples because it's the sort of like most common thing that we do. But you can, as a videographer, you really do have to be organised, and you are thinking about much more than just the image. So because you are thinking about, you've got the audio, that's the main thing that people will get concerned about. I think it's the main thing that puts people off getting into video. If you talk to a photographer, they always say the same thing about, I'd like to do video, but the audio, I'm just not sure. You know, to be fair, when you've been doing it for a while, you don't really worry about the audio so much. It can be very much simplified, I think, but it is definitely something additional to think about. You know, like you've got to think about how can I capture that audio. Now, if you've got some experience at it, it becomes, like I say, quite a straightforward process. But you've still got to be prepared, because you've got to put those microphones on people, or you've got to have the microphone in the right location. You've got to do that in advance. You know, I know we've been there where it's all happened a bit quick. We were expecting it, and Lindsay's there trying to put a mic in someone's pocket as they've started the speech. It's only happened on 1 or 2 occasions, but it's quite funny to watch it. But, you know, ideally that's not happening. You want to be prepared in advance. Yeah. You've got to think about that. And there are lots of little things to think about, like placement, positioning. Right, a photographer can move around very easily, you know, and that's why photographers in live events like weddings move around a bit. It's much harder to pull that off when you're doing video, because your footage is just going to look shocking if you're moving around all the time, especially like in a ceremony. It's okay if you're moving around because you've got a locked off camera somewhere that you can cut to, but you know, for the, you know, most of the time you're not going to want to be moving around in those situations, and you need more time to get that shot. Whereas a photographer, I've got it, click, I've got it, I've got that shot, right, I can move on, or I know I've got it. Whereas we need a few more seconds at least when it comes to doing the video. So you can't be, you have to think, right, I've got to get there, that's where I need to be in advance, ready. I need to be planted. I need to get the shot. I need to hold it for quite a few seconds, because I want, you know, there's no point if I get, even if you do it shooting really slow motion, you know, you can't just get 1 second footage. You need several seconds at the bare minimum to be able to make it into the film that you're going to create. So you really have to have that mentality all the time. And I imagine if you started off in photography and you tried to incorporate video, that's one of the things that you're probably going to find more of a challenge. Is that you can't just got it. And being there ready and anticipating. Whereas a photographer can pretty much run into position and be shooting while they're moving, if that's what's needed. You can't really do that with video unless you're going for that look of like, which not many people are going to be going for, kind of like this, you know, really high energy, camera's moving all the time. So from that perspective, video becomes much harder to do it well.
How do you think, we've talked a lot about weddings there, but just to consider the commercial side of things for a moment, then let's say you know, a shoot that's set up for a small business that just wants some content creating for that they will use across online platforms, website, etc. And they want a mixture of both.
So photo and video.
Photo and video. So do you think the two kind of come a little closer together,
Mm.
because of the nature of what you're doing.
If the event's not live.
If the event, yeah.
If you've got time to set things up, but again, you would probably be thinking slightly different for both. I mean, I know how I would do it, how I would approach that situation. I do approach that situation, and it again, it depends on the equipment you've got. Because ideally, what you do is you set something up, you light it in a way that will look good for both photo and video, or you have your lights, whether it's like strobes and your constant light set up to complement or be next to each other, and then you kind of you have a camera that you can use for photo and a camera that you can use for video, and you're almost doing that. You are literally doing them alongside each other. But not everyone's going to have all that equipment, so you're going to have to make some compromises potentially. But I mean, just to kind of like go back to the video aspect as well, something like a wedding, you do have a bit more to manage as well. Like, for example, and this shouldn't really be a thing, but the reality is it is. So thinking about management of cameras. Now, when we first started out, there wasn't very many cameras. Obviously, if you got like a camcorder or a higher end cinema camera, they would record for long periods of time, but the other stuff had the record limits, and there's a lot of people that will still be using cameras that are a few years old that have still got those, 30-minute record limits. Yeah. So you had to consider things like that. Obviously the cameras we've got now don't have those record limits, but you do have to worry about whether they're going to get too hot in certain situations, in certain environments, and they can switch themselves off. The batteries drain quicker. A photographer is using the camera and they can probably use one battery all day. Do you know what I mean? Or certainly like one battery for most of the day. They might need to change it later on. We have to think, if we're shooting video, we have to think about putting a brand new battery. Even if you've got let's say you've got 50-60% on your battery before that ceremony starts, because you can't 100% know how long that ceremony is going to go on for, particularly if it's like a church run or something. You can't have 50% on your battery. You've got to put a new battery in. It's kind of, there's these extra things to think about with video that I just don't think ever comes into play with photo. It's like, I've seen plenty of photographers fill up the memory card and have to switch on the fly, at like a really awkward time. You can't do that if you're doing video. That's going to completely screw you up, because you need that continuous recording. You can't be stop starting. You once you're in a ceremony or something like that, you can't be changing batteries and memory cards. You can't have your camera fail on you. If it does, it's a massive problem. This is why you've got to use multiple cameras also, because you need the kind of redundancy, so that as well as having cutaway shots, you need the redundancy. So yeah, that side of it, that aspect of it's much more complex. There's more to think about. And there are different things to think about also. So if you're thinking about lighting's although people will say it's not, it is effectively, if you understand how your light works, you're going to use it in a similar way, whether you're doing photo or video. But things like shutter speed, it's these things can be a bit more of a thing, like using ND filters to get the right kind of look in your image. You sticking with your 180 rule. Not that necessarily that's what I would say we do, but some people might need extra bits of equipment like ND filters to be able to achieve that. It's not very often that a photographer, unless they're trying to do a particular type of shot, that is going to need an ND filter during a wedding. You know what I mean? Because they're just going to use the camera controls to do that. So yeah, there's other things to think about in regards to that. So what about after the wedding then, post-production and delivery? Editing.
Well, for the video, straight up, there's so much more data to be dealing with there. So you're going to need more storage, bigger storage, arguably a more powerful computer.
Yeah, definitely.
laptop.
Depends what you're editing, but yeah, generally you will need, especially with the newer cameras, recording 4K and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas most computers could handle, even if they were a bit slow, most computers can handle running Photoshop or Lightroom and dealing with raw images. So
you could say then that perhaps from the outset, or as you kind of go along on your journey, you will need to make more of an investment as a filmmaker than you do in your photography.
I'd say that's fair enough.
For the hardware, when it comes to the post-production, for those reasons, because of the storage that you will need, because of the amount of data, the information that needs processing, arguably you're going to need a far more powerful, bigger setup.
Yeah, definitely. What about having to actually do the editing? I know you've never really got into the kind of video editing, but you've handled like the photo side. Now, why is that? Is that do you see that as like, do you see the video editing as more daunting?
Yeah. I've always said I won't get involved in the editing of maybe like ceremony speeches and things, but not a creative film. But that's because I think that the kind of success of the business has been built on the quality of the product that you've created. So and that's a winning formula. So I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to interfere with that. And you have, a long and well established method and a process now.
Yeah, but I've also said to you that I think you can learn that. Like, and I'm not just saying to you now, I'm saying in general, I think that you can teach somebody how to edit video in a specific way. There's always going to be this like creative aspect to it, the way that you kind of see it, and the way that you then put that together. And for me, that does change from, I don't really have a 100% set formula. I have kind of sometimes I'll have a more of a go-to approach. Sometimes I'll just go completely wacky. But I don't always know where I'm going to start. Do you know what I mean? So yes, I guess that is a creative aspect. But then there is a way of teaching somebody a formula to be able to create a creative film. And certainly with the doc stuff, it is very much a process.
Yeah, but so I'm saying winning formula, but I don't I'm not suggesting a template. So like a template approach to the films, because I would say then another very time consuming challenge for video editing is the music selection.
Well, there is, yes.
Because of the
you don't have that
time.
With photo, you're right.
You don't have that with photographs. I will say, I mean, we'll come on to it. It's six of one, half a dozen of the other in some respects, because photographers, I'm sure when it comes to different looks and actually tweaking, getting presets ready and things like that, people can spend a heck of a lot of time on tweaking that. But to stick with a video for a second, I'm saying you have a formula, so I don't want to get involved with that, because I don't want to kind of mess with a winning formula. But I'm careful to say not a template, because that's not what you have, because you do spend such a lot of time invested in looking at the music and choosing the right piece of music for people, and that's all informed by work way back. We're on like post, so we've done before, during and after we're on now, but that comes in before that process even starts, at the before stage, if you like, because you're getting that information from couples in the first place. You're asking about their kind of musical interests. Yeah,
you wouldn't, as a photographer, you don't need to ask those questions, really. Yeah, because it's kind of irrelevant. Yeah. So that, for me, that's a huge time. Just seeing what you consider, but when you're starting to make a video, for everything from
looking at the music, but the audio as well.
Yeah.
And instead of relying on a single source of audio, we're always careful to have a number of different options, but you know that means that still you need to sift through those to find what's the best
to see which is going to be the best one, because it's not always as simple as, well, that they were speaking, it's the microphone that they were wearing, because there might have been a problem with it or whatever. You might need to clean it up. So yeah, from a video editing perspective, you've got to think about the music, you've got to think about the actual video editing, but you also need to think about things like being able to edit audio. And this is not a necessity. We're not talking about like you have to be able to edit audio to be able to make a wedding video or something like that. But actually, it's a skill that you probably need to develop if you want to be better at what you do.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose with the photo, whether you use Photoshop or Lightroom, once you've learned that and you're proficient in it, that's the tool that you're going to use for your editing. And now with AI, that process is becoming even more simple. Whereas in reality, I think even it'll be much more difficult to edit video. You know, for AI it will improve aspects of video editing and some of it, but I don't think it's going to be as quick as the advances in photo editing. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, video editing is that much harder than photo editing. It's not like, it's quite subjective. It's photo editing anyway. So someone might not really do any edits to their RAWs. They might have a preset they put on. They might tweak a few settings, you know, a bit of exposure, a bit of white balance, and that's it. They don't really do. Some people might do tons and tons of post production. They might be, you know, stacking images and making the words escaping me, where you put more than one image together. Anyway, but you know, merging, but like there's a term for it that I can't remember for some strange reason. But like what I'm getting at is some people will make, you know, they will create their images in post, where some people are, you know, they're not spending as much time on post production. So I get that with photo editing there is different levels of involvement. But generally, because you're not thinking about all those extra things, you know, like the audio, the music, and having to kind of, as well, you've got a lot more to sift through. You think about culling, right? You know, you can literally look at an image and you can select it or deselect it, looking at it for a split second. Yeah. So to go through thousands of images, it might take someone less than an hour, you know, if they're really proficient and quick at it. Whereas there's no way to do that with video. You can look at the start of a clip and be like, right, I think this is that clip, you know, because it's hard to remember. But you can be like, I think this is the thing that I want. But you then got to like skim through all of that clip to find the bit that you want to use anyway. So there's no way to do it anywhere near as quick as with photo. Manipulating the footage, you know, think about how easy it is to manipulate raw pictures. The exposure changes, you know, you can rescue horrendously bad shot photos and still make them into something, whether it's like with the white balance and the colouring, or whether it's to do with the exposure. Much harder, and it's got better with like, you know, the advances in the cameras and the fact that we're using like 10-bit colours now, and we've got, you know, we're not recording raw video isn't quite, even though you can do it in certain cameras and in certain devices, it's not a good idea you wouldn't want to record a whole wedding in a raw codec, because it'd melt your computer probably, and you know, it'd be quite difficult to process. But you know, it has got better, but it's still nowhere near where a raw photo is. So you know, and think about like removing things from a photo, masking a photo so that you can manipulate different parts of it. You can do those things in video, but it's just so much harder and so much more time consuming. So you've got less flexibility when it comes to stuff like that. And then at the end, you know, you can export a whole gallery with the photos quite quickly. depending on how long your video is and your computer and everything, it might take you quite a long time.
Yeah.
Then there's the uploads. It's just everything is magnified by 10 when it comes to doing video. So let's think about like from a post and delivery perspective, like the benefits of photo as well. Like think about what you can do with photo. You've got your digital files, you've got your online gallery, but like you can deliver prints, you can offer albums. There's more variety in the sort of products you can offer.
Yeah,
it's really quite limited with video. You're going to send them a digital file, and you're either sending them that digital file, uploading it to a delivery platform or a video watching platform, or you are sending it on a digital file on a USB stick or something. Mm-hmm. But you can't do as much with that. No. So you can't like upsell.
I was going to say there's more opportunity for upsell with photography because there are more deliverable options.
Yeah, you can do some stuff. You can do some stuff like, I've heard people hiring cinema screens to show the film. There's those books that are like they're like online, not online. They're like they've got a little screen in them. It's almost like a video album. But I just like the cinema screen. How many people are going to go for that? It's going to be quite a cost. The logistics of getting people to come and watch your wedding video. It's fine if you've got loads of money and you're really into it, but for the average person, that's probably not realistic. And then there's the whole video book. I mean, the problem is you've got this small screen that's never going to be as good as your phone screen, but it's just going to be a similar size. It's certainly not going to be as good as watching it on a big TV or something. Yeah,
and I think that to going back to your point about the cinema screen as well, I think in the last year or so, I have become more aware of, or rather more of our couples have said, we're going to have a viewing party this weekend, and we're going to watch the full film when our family and friends come round. So it's not a case of it not being something that doesn't happen, that isn't done now. But I think, I don't see, maybe in other parts of the world there would be, but I don't see that there'd be an appetite for...
Not for the masses.
...cinema screening, no, but something a little bit more sort of intimate with your close family and friends. You invite them over to the house. So, giving them the ability to be able to watch it on a nice big TV, like you say.
But plus, like, with the cinema thing, for us, like... if you were trying to organise that, so as the supplier, you're trying to organise a cinema party and you add on however much, and there's going to be some hassles involved with making sure everything's in the right format so it plays really well. You're going to need to like test that. Obviously, you got to source this cinema, and then there's the logistics of doing it all, and then whatever you're going to charge the couple, it's going to cost for this cinema, isn't it? And then whatever you're going to charge the couple, how much time and effort are you going to have to put into that? And like contrast that against getting some prints printed out, which you can do automatically from an online gallery. You don't even need to touch anything and you're making money. Or even have it if you've got to design an album, what's that going to take you, an hour? And you send it off, it gets made and delivered. So there's not very much, you're going to make potentially hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds from doing something that's not going to take you very much time. Whereas sorting out a cinema screen, unless you're going to be able to charge like thousands of pounds for it, you're not really going to get paid for your time. So, that's a downside, I would say. Photo gives you so much more options, and there's less work involved in it. So, summarise. Video is technically harder, more complex, and there's more equipment. But you could argue a photographer would say, well, photography is hard as well. Photography is technically hard to do it well. And I think that's the thing. It's a subjective thing. Because what is a good video? What is a good videographer? What is a good photo? What is a good photographer? It's subjective. There's no right answer. Just like there's no right answer with which is harder. The video is definitely going to need you to invest more money it's definitely going to need you to spend more time learning more aspects of something. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean it's harder than photo to be the best, to be amazing at it, because it's a subjective thing. It's art, it's creativity, it's something that one person's good is another person's mediocre. So that's why sitting on the fence, really. Because if you're somebody who says, well, photography is miles harder or videography, filmmaking's miles harder, it's not really about that. You've got to be able to appreciate different skill sets and different approaches. Capturing a perfect still photo could be more difficult than creating a short film, because in that one photo, to make that perfect photo, everything would have to be right. And the chances are it's going to be hard to make sure everything in that photo is right, from the lighting and the composition to what's actually taking place in the scene, because you've got that one moment. Whereas at least in a video, you're providing this extra context, you're giving them sound and you're giving them movement, and those things in themselves are like, make something that wouldn't necessarily look that amazing look and feel much better than it actually is. And probably why slowly video has started to become more important to people at things like weddings and generally in our lives, because it gives extra pieces of information that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get just from the photo would have to be perfect for you to feel everything that it wants you to feel, whereas a video can be less perfect and give you all those things.
It can be kind of built up to a peak and then kind of fade, and
but you can't print a video out. You can't put a video on a wall or in a book. And I think still, from what I can see, I still think, even though social media platforms and stuff have been pushing video for the last couple of years, I still think it's more impactful a lot of the time to be posting stills, because people don't need to take as long to watch it, do they? They might need to, like, I'll tell you what I find quite difficult and frustrating is that we spend, let's say you could spend days putting together this short wedding film. Now, unless you watch, let's say it's 5 minutes long, unless you watch the entire 5 minutes, you can't get you don't get the gist. Yeah, you can't just watch a couple of seconds at the start. Plus, if you're doing it well, you're probably going to want to build up to something. So the start of it is only going to make sense if you watch it for, the whole thing. Yeah. Because you're not going to get hit straight away. Whereas actually you can take this amazing photo and someone sees it and instantly they go, wow. Do you know what I mean? And it's very difficult, I think, to get that with moving images. You can have a wow shot. Yeah. But if you're wanting to actually tell the narrative. Yeah. Yeah. Whereas in the photo, you could see the story instantly.
Instant wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than, I need to pay attention here for it. And then wow.
And we live in a world, don't we, where everybody wants it instant. Now and they want it instant. Yeah. So they don't all have time to take it all in, and especially now, how many people are posting their full, like if they're a wedding filmmaker, how many people are posting their full wedding video on Instagram or whatever? Like the algorithm doesn't like it. And nobody's watching it. Nobody watches it. So it doesn't get any views. So what's the point in putting it on social media? Because it doesn't do anything for you. So then you're having to kind of resort to making something else, either taking a still, a frame grab, or you're having to, make shorter versions of your videos that aren't really telling the story. They're not really, narratively driven. They're just like, well, the photographer got this banging shot, and at the same time, I got this banging shot. Like, let's show the confetti shot because that looked pretty epic, or let's show this drone shot. But it's not the story. It just looks cool. Yeah. So, I think in that respect, it's better for a photographer. It's, more powerful even though videos getting pushed, I think for a photographer, it's easier to get that attention. But photography is a more saturated market. There's more photographers. The photography has been a bigger thing for longer. So there's more competition. Video, there's more opportunity to make, to kind of make a business potentially. I think it's maybe harder for a photographer to start a business and build it up successfully. I think video maybe can do it a little bit quicker. What do you think?
Well, I know that's been our experience, hasn't it? Because that's where we started in video.
But it's changing.
It is definitely, the tide's definitely changed in that respect. But I would certainly agree that it's a far more saturated market to break into and become successful. Particularly, I would say, in the mid-range pricing market,
where most people are going to be operating.
Yeah.
But I say as well, it's harder, or there seems to be, and I'm not sure this is necessarily our experience, but I can definitely, I've heard lots of people talk about how it's easier to charge more for photo. I'm not sure I believe that, but I know that that's a lot of people's experiences. That some people feel like it's harder to get people to spend more on the video, even though the video takes longer, it needs more equipment, it's probably more expensive to be able to produce the video. So the video should automatically cost more money.
Yeah.
But people are more inclined, so a lot of people have the opinion, more inclined to spend more on a photographer and video as an afterthought. Now, I don't think we have that experience.
No.
I'd say if we're doing, I know this sounds awful, but if we're doing video, I'd say 80%, 70% of the time, we're getting paid more than the photographer.
Yeah. But that's, and that...
It wasn't always like that, though.
No, that's come over time as we've built an experience. But to what you would, the point that you were just making, I think that's knowledge of the consumer as well. That's down to kind of knowledge of and experience of seeing a creative wedding film and being able to kind of appreciate what that can do for you. And it's taken some time for the wheel to start kind of turning
changing,
and for people's knowledge base to have been broadened. I would actually say for all its faults, I don't know, but for all the things it makes us grit its teeth about, the way that social media has driven people's attention towards video and people's appetite for video, I think that has helped to change that in people's minds. I think it's and because they then will share that online, I think the kind of the awareness of it and the appreciation for it has changed, and that's why we can now elevate our prices.
So where do you think that goes then? Do you think that carries on? Do you think that video becomes more and more appreciated, and you don't hire a photographer and a video is like secondary? It is, you're going to hire both / somebody who does both.
Yeah. So exactly that. I think it will come closer to, but I'm not sure yet that I see that it will overtake photography, and the time will completely change so that it's reversed to first on the list is book the videographer, or even that kind of terminology, like you say. I see first of all it being a case of I book a hybrid shooter on the list, I book someone that's going to do film and photo for my wedding, and I see in the future less of the kind of separate language.
Yeah.
But not it kind of overtaking photo.
So did we answer which one's harder?
No. I
because
certainly feel
because
splinters from sitting on the fence.
But it is, isn't it? If you look at it objectively and you're not kind of siding one day, because you're a photographer or you're a videographer, and you're siding on one thing because that's where you've got the experience, or your opinion is that is a better skill or a harder skill to master. They are both valid skills, both really important skills. Even though they are coming together and they are becoming more similar, there's still aspects of them both that are more difficult at different points, whether it's in the kind of preparation phase, in the shooting phase, or in the post-production phase. And they both have their positives, of what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
In terms of telling a story, in terms of what you can do with them afterwards, in like how you're going to deliver things. But also, I think the main thing to focus on is not whether photography or videography is the better or the harder one, but more how can you make money from these skills. And the actual thing to focus on is probably being better at marketing, better at customer service, because these things are probably the more challenging things to win at. And they're the things that are actually going to make a difference if you're wanting to make money from this. Yeah.
And conveying that in the right way. Because so far you've articulated yourself and you've connected with couples based on being a photographer or a videographer. So now how do you develop what you're offering? And how do you convey that to people whilst kind of maintaining, I guess, what you're all about at your core, what's made your success so far? How do you continue to do that as you kind of evolve now into something slightly different?
Absolutely. So that's it for this episode. If you've got any questions, or if you've got any comments, got any opinions to share with us, we'd love to hear them. And the best way is to contact us on Instagram, on a DM. And our Instagram handle is @your.story.studios. We really appreciate you listening. If you've got something out of this, please like the episode wherever you're listening to it or watching it on YouTube. We'd love it if you'd subscribe to the podcast, and we will see you on another episode.
Take care.
Bye.